Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at two of the coolest weapons that you can actually make in Fallout New Vegas. Today we're going to be taking a look at the MFC grenade, or the microfusion cell grenade, and we're going to be taking a look at the MFC clusters. And the clusters are one of my absolute favorite weapons in this game. They are very, very cool. So one thing that's very important to mention about both these weapons right away is that they are perk related. You can't get them any other way normally, unless you have mods, in which case then you can kind of get anything. And you also do need to have the Gunner's Arsenal DLC in order to get this, because it is a perk related to that DLC. So you do need to have the perk Mad Bomber. This one you can get as soon as you're level 8 and you have enough explosives to get it, which I believe is 45 explosives. I didn't look that up, but I think that's correct. And this unlocks both these recipes that you can make at workbenches. So let's talk about the grenade first, and then we'll talk about the clusters. So first up, the material that you actually need to make the cluster grenades is incredibly simple. All you need is 3 microfusion cells, and that is it. You don't need anything else. These do have to be regular microfusion cells. Any other cells will not work for this. So if you have bulk cells, or optimized cells, or max cells, they're not going to go for this. Those can only be used in the energy weapons themselves. I imagine that was done just for convenience sake. Otherwise, it would be kind of weird to code these as well. But you just need 3 regular microfusion cells. That's really cool, because usually when you find microfusion cells, at least a pile of them that you could find on like a bench or something, they usually come in a pack of like 20 of them. So you get about 6 grenades out of each one of these if you would like to convert all of them to that. And you'll still be left over with 2 extra cells at the end of it. Aside from that, you just need the Mad Bomber perk and 50 explosives in order to make this, which if you're going with an explosives build, you're probably going to hit 50 explosives pretty early on. That's only 5 more than what you need for Mad Bomber anyway, and you can make these at any sort of workbench. The microfusion grenade requires 25 explosives to wield, which is kind of weird because you need 50 explosives to even make these, so you should definitely have that. I don't know why you wouldn't. And 2 strength to throw this, so very low strength requirement. Any build is going to be able to do this, because even if you went with 1 strength, reinforced spine gives you 2, and your strength implant will get you another 1, so you're guaranteed to be up to like 4 strength, assuming that you're doing quests. The microfusion grenade itself, when thrown, will do 1 damage on direct hit, like most of the explosives, and then from the explosion, it will do 75 damage, which is pretty decent. That's not a huge amount of damage, but it's not a low amount of damage either. It's definitely better than something like a tin grenade, and about on par with something like a frag grenade, although I believe a frag grenade has a larger explosion radius than this, or at least it certainly feels like it does. This does 50 damage per second. Damage per second is weird with explosives, but that's what the wiki says, so we'll go with it. This has a big old 0 for the crit damage. Most explosives don't get crits, so that's not too surprising. This is a 1x crit modifier. Doesn't matter if you can't hit crits with it though. This one costs 35 action points, which is pretty normal for a thrown explosive. That's nothing real crazy, and these ones weigh half a weight like most explosives. That does actually make it, I believe, if you convert all of these, heavier than if you just kept them as the microfusion cells, which you may want to do just for transportation's sake, but if you're going with a full explosives build, then you might want to change these. Half a weight is pretty normal for any sort of thrown or placed explosive, really. For the general pros of both the clusters and the grenades, they do pretty good damage. The clusters do a lot more damage than the regular grenades, but the regular grenades do enough. They have great DPS because you can chuck these out fairly quick, even more so with the clusters than with the regular grenades, but we'll talk about them in a second. And at least in the grenade's sake, these are super easy to make. They only take 3 microfusion cells. You're probably going to find a ton of microfusion cells. You can go and buy a bunch if you'd like from like the Silver Rush or the Brotherhood. Even just regular vendors tend to sell microfusion cells, so you could even just loot regular vendors. Check out like the Crimson Caravan, check out Mick and Ralph's, check out like the 188. They'll probably have some microfusion cells that you can trade for them. You're just looking for the regular microfusion cells, and you can make your grenades all you like. The only real con to both these is that you do need a perk to get it, but that's hardly a con if you're going with an explosives build and you plan on making these anyway, because it was probably going to be a perk you were going to take regardless. So the con is likely not very much of a con. Even if you're not going with an explosives build, at least specifically, and you want to go with like a mixed build or a hybrid build of kind of everything, or a jack of all trades build, Mad Bomber is not a bad perk to take, just so that you can get more recipes unlocked and be making other things, besides all the regular cons that come with explosive weapons, like you being able to injure yourself. They're not always the best to be using indoors. They're not always the best to be using in vats, because sometimes they can bounce back to you. You have to space them out, so you don't want to throw them too close to one another, because otherwise the second one might get blown back from the first explosion and blow up on you, and that's not really that good either. Those are all just the standard things that come with using explosives and kind of all the precautions you need to take when using those type of builds. There are a couple of perks that help these too. We already talked about Mad Bomber since you need that to actually make these. Demo Expert is fantastic because it gets you more damage with these, so if you're doing an explosive build, you might as well take that, take it all 3 times so you get all the damage. Splash damage can be potentially useful with these. The regular grenades don't really have that big of an explosion radius, so splash damage can help with that. The clusters have a bigger explosion radius, but that's because it's multiple explosions going off since it's 6 grenades you're chucking out at once. Kind of makes sense that it would be more. And splash damage is kind of a double-edged sword. You don't really want it when you're indoors, but outdoors it can be kind of useful. So that one's your call. Hit the deck is fantastic too. Gives you more defense towards your own explosions, so you're less likely to blow yourself up. Really good stuff there. Pack Rat's another really good one since it just cuts down the weight on all these. And they go down from half a weight to a quarter of a weight, so you can carry around more. Really cool. For an overall rating for the regular MFC grenade, I would put this one up into A tier. Even though it's not necessarily one of the strongest thrown grenades, it's pretty much on par with something like the frag grenade in my opinion, because they're about as common as frag grenades. You could actually argue these as being way more common. They don't necessarily outcompete the frag grenade, but they're a nice alternative to them, so that's why I'd kind of put it up there. It's not overpowered or anything like that, but it is a solid all-around choice, and it's a very fun grenade to use. It's also just probably the most plentiful grenade that you can get besides maybe frag grenades, since they're fairly common as well. Now let's move on to the cluster grenades. The cluster grenades are technically not actually thrown explosives, even though they are, but they're classified as placed explosives. And that's kind of for a certain reason, because these are actually just 6 of your microfusion cell grenades that have been all attached together. And then you chuck this out, and it technically doesn't detonate until it hits the ground, which does make it weird because it doesn't work all the time against flying enemies like Kazdors. That can be kind of annoying, and you do have to sort of remember that placed explosives don't really work against flying enemies since they just go over the top of it. But against any sort of regular walking enemy, which is going to be like 95% of the enemies that you're fighting, this should work just fine. These ones require a little bit different when actually making. So these ones do still require 18 microfusion cells, as you would kind of expect since it takes 3 per cell and you're getting 6 of them. This does take an additional duct tape and 2 scrap electronics though. So I guess they are quite a bit harder to make than just regular microfusion cell grenades, but those are the easiest grenades in the entire game to make. So having them be quite a bit more difficult isn't really that hard. Duct tape is super common to find, and once you have the sync unlocked, it's really easy to get. As well as scrap electronics are also incredibly easy to get because most vendors will sell them, and again, if you have the sync, you can get them from parts and stuff, so that's pretty nice. You do still need to have a workbench in order to make these. You do need to have 70 explosives in order to make these, which is also going to make their explosives requirement a little bit weird since you need 70 in order just to make them. To actually wield these, you only need 50 explosives, so I don't know why. Only 1 strength to throw these. I don't know why these require less strength than the regular microfusion cell grenades, but they do. These ones deal 6 damage, or up to 6 damage, depending on how many of the grenades actually physically hit an enemy, and then when they explode, they do 450 damage, which is very high. The cluster grenades do lots of damage per second. They're really good against just about everything in the game. This does 297 damage per second. Very high. That's just what the wiki says. Again, the damage could range quite a bit with this one because it does cover a large area and it could trigger chain explosions to hit multiple enemies. Even more so if you're throwing these on the ground and then you throw one at an enemy and all of them end up going off. That can be very dangerous though for yourself too. This has a big old 0 for the crit damage, 1 times crit modifier, costs 35 action points. You might not want to be using this in a VATS build either, because they might land at your feet and you might blow yourself up. And these ones also weigh half a weight. They don't actually weigh any more than just the regular microfusion cells for whatever reason, or microfusion cell grenades. So Pack Rat will also cut their weight in half down to just a quarter of a weight, which makes them really, really good. Also, since these are technically placed explosives, once you throw these out, and if enemies don't walk across them, or if you threw another one out after the enemies had died, these still sit on the ground. They still sit on the ground as the actual microfusion cell grenades that you can go and pick up. You do have to disarm them and then pick them up, but once you put them in your inventory, it's just going to count as a regular grenade, which you can throw again. The clusters are one of the best explosives in the entire game, in my opinion, and definitely one of the most fun. They're probably in my top 10 of most fun and favorite weapons in the game, and I would put these things all the way up into S tier. They are really, really good. Even if you pick them up, then you still get the regular grenades, which I'm going to say is A tier. They're just the tier below that. And I mean, you do get 6 of them, so assuming not all of them went off, then you can still use them after that for something else, which is really cool. So should you use the cluster grenades and the microfusion cell grenade? Yeah, sure. If you're doing an explosive run, or if you've never used the cluster grenades before, I would highly recommend you try them out because they are super fun to use. Even if you just want to spawn them in and test them out that way, they are very, very fun to use. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Tell me your thoughts on the microfusion cell grenade and the clusters as well. Where would you rank them, and do you guys use them? Have you ever used them? And thank you guys so very much for watching this again. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye, everybody.